For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates. This is Stratnewsglobal. I'm Amitabh. Revi. On the gist today, we're looking at Myanmar's ousted leader, Aung San Suu Kyi's sentencing, and how the region and the world has been reacting 10 months after the military coup. Glad to be joined today by Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhaya. He's been India's ex-envoy to Myanmar. Good to see you, sir, in person after a long time.
Thank you. Good to be back with StratNews, Amitabh.
Ambassador, we have not really been touching on Myanmar for a long time, and now you have Aung San Suu Kyi's sentencing. The whole trial itself was a sham. It was expected. There are more counts on what? For inciting people and violating COVID restrictions. Those are the charges now. But overall, since it was expected, what's the purpose that the junta is trying to achieve here? To just sideline her completely?
I think the basic purpose is that they've always disliked and distrusted Aung San Suu Kyi. They do not like the whole movement of the NLD. Basically, it's a clash between people power and military power, between institutional power of the Tamadaw and the charismatic power of Aung San Suu Kyi. And right from the beginning, even from her last series of incarcerations and house arrests, the idea has been to remove her and, if possible, the NLD out of the politics of Myanmar, out of certainly the governance of Myanmar.
Ultimately, they're saying, if she's sentenced for all that she's facing, right, it could be over 100 years.
Exactly. The basic message has been to keep her out. There's a deep distrust and dislike, and so all this is part of that phenomenon. These are just, I think, one or two charges on which she's finally been sentenced, but there are several other charges that are still pending. So this will continue, and they will add on, and it's cumulative effect will be to keep her out of politics and out of contention for a long time. It is possible down the road, people are speculating that they might also leverage this to negotiate and bargain and come to some kind of arrangement which does not mean a kind of long-term incarceration, but that has yet to be seen.
But over these last 10 months or so, right, has action against her, against the NLD, and it's not just that, violent suppression, over 1,000 deaths, 30,000 arrests, has that galvanized the opposition to the military junta?
See, the opposition to the military junta was there right from the beginning.
Sure.
Right from the beginning, this was an extremely unpopular act. There was simply no segment of society that supported, other than the USDP and a few sort of splinter parties, that supported the military action. So I think that alienation was there. What has changed is that what started off as a peaceful civil disobedient movement has now migrated to the countryside and has turned into an armed kind of insurrection against the Tamadaw. So you are seeing, and of course, this has been accompanied by pretty brutal and savage reprisals against demonstrators and protests inside Myanmar. And the figures, well over 1,200 killed, so many detained, reports of torture in jails, and lots of very disturbing sort of images that came out during that time.
Even recently, we saw one of the military vehicles plowing into protesters.
But that was one incident, an urban incident that took place after a long time. By and large, they had managed to call it pacify or call it drive them away. A lot of the urban youth also migrated to many of the insurgent camps, ethnic armed organization camps, got trained, and now they are fighting, and they're fighting. The fighting has been, different groups at different places at different times. But the particular, I think, concentration has been towards Western Myanmar in Sagaing Division and in Chin State in particular, and on the east towards Kaya State. Actually, Chin and Kaya have not been sort of the usual centers of resistance to the Tamadaw. That has been in the Kachin areas, in the Karen areas, in the Shan areas, and also in the Rakhine area more recently. So what we are seeing is a kind of temporary, you can call it a temporary quiet in many of those areas, but extremely tense actions taking place. In fact, in the case of Chin State, very close to our border, and also causing movements of people internally displaced as well as refugees across the border.
That point itself, Ambassador, in terms of the fallout for India, whether it's IDPs coming across the border, or recently we've seen what happened in Manipur, that horrific incident with the CEO, his kid and wife, apart from the four service personnel. Nagaland, another operation there. The fallout for India, how do you see that in the last 10 months?
Yeah, I think, the fallout was to be expected. The incident involving the Assam Rifles commandant was very tragic. The whole family went. The local people there themselves were extremely anguished and concerned about it. So what I think we can surmise is that disturbed and unstable conditions in Myanmar are also creating conditions for some of the militant groups that have been taking refuge on the Myanmar side for a long time to get more active. It's a kind of environment that becomes more permissive. There's always been a certain amount of drug trafficking there. Many of these insurgent outfits have profited from that. So the drug trade, a kind of ungoverned space, if you can call it, or at least the focus of the Tamadaw is elsewhere. It is less on governance, it's more on security domination. So all this, I think, creates the conditions for more militant activity to affect us as well. And I think what we are seeing are sort of various different manifestations of that. I should also mention that the incident involving, the Mon villagers in Oting was a very tragic incident. And, I think we all share the anguish of the Naga people at some serious intelligence as well as operational error that took place in that incident.
India's policy in the last 10 months or so, I mean, we had a different kind of policy before February and the coup in terms of dealing with the NLD, Aung San Suu Kyi and the Tamadaw. Now, is it similar to what happened in Afghanistan? It's just, reacting to developments there and leaving us out of the fray?
See, I think we should have a little more confidence in India's ability not to be left out. We are just far too big and too close to both these theaters of conflict to, just not matter. What I would say is that I think we were riding that period of cohabitation reasonably well, being able to work with the Tamadaw on basically national defense issues, not on issues of internal security or politics. And we were able to work with the NLD on essentially development cooperation, trade, investment, basically building up state to state and people relations. And I think, elsewhere I've argued that we could have done more, we should have done more. But overall, I would say that the overall trajectory of relations with both was going very positively. Obviously, that has changed. We have never been very comfortable with either our choices in our neighborhood. And so that has changed. And clearly, we are not able to support the Tamadaw in its actions. But at least at the first phase, we have really relied on the international community, in particular the ASEAN, given their privileged role in Myanmar as a member, as fellow members, to find solutions. And this is, of course, what ASEAN has been wanting, ASEAN centrality and their prerogative in a way to try and address this problem. And I think ASEAN has made very good faith efforts. It has been slow, it has been criticized in Myanmar, it has been also divided. And I think some of those
the
tensions...
nature of the beast.
Right. And some of those tensions continue. But certainly over the last 2-3 months, we did see a certain greater degree of activism on the part of Myanmar to address the issue. And I think we've been kind of really hoping that this crisis will somehow be resolved with the ASEAN intervention.
You talked earlier about how the conditions were being laid for increased militant activity within India's borders. Right. Reports suggesting that insurgent groups which take refuge across the border in Myanmar actually are working with the Tamadaw in terms of getting refuge for attacking, the PDF or the opposition.
Yes, I too have seen reports about that. I can't personally, from myself, confirm that. But this would be pretty much in line with Tamado practice. In the past too, they've had a fairly comfortable and cozy relationship with particularly, I would say, some of the Manipuri, insurgent groups.
Pre-February, they were actually acting against them with our forces, right?
So there has been a bit of both and at different points of time.
Right.
But you should remember that some of these groups have been long embedded. They've been long entrenched in Myanmar. They've developed, much more
Contacts.
established kind of relationships. I don't want to go into details, but there have been other occasions in the past where the Myanmar have used some of these insurgent groups even for their internal issues, mostly in the western region. Relocate camps when the pressure has been here, use them against other groups when required. And so it's been a kind of mutually beneficial and somewhat symbiotic relationship.
And the relationship between China and Aung San or the Tamadao initially was a lot of mistrust. But is China now making inroads because of the situation? They're both security-wise and development-wise.
Right. So one thing I will say is that the Tamadao, in particular, Senior General Min Aung Hlaing, in my view, this is personal, has long actually been quite suspicious of China. They've had frictions in the past, in particularly over the Kokang issue, much more recently. And I don't think there's any great warmth in the relationship between China and Myanmar in general, even between the Tamadao and China. China has always been ready to take advantage of any discomfort and vulnerability on the part of Myanmar. In general, we saw that in the context of pressures on the Rohingya issue. But also in particular, the relationship between even the Tamadao and China has not been comfortable. There have been frictions in the past on account of Kokang. And China would certainly not have been the first place of refuge for the Tamadao in this situation. But China has always been very careful to play both horses, ride both horses, play all cards. So it talks the language of, unity, but at the same time provides the Tamadao enough support, but not total support, because, the Chinese are also masters at capitalizing on inbuilt tensions in even their best of relations, let alone those with whom they want to extract strategic advantage. And China does definitely have strategic interests in Myanmar, basically leading to the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean. So China has sort of very deep interests. It has economic interests, it has strategic interests, and it has, of course, ethnic communities that are cross-border, many of them that are of Chinese-speaking ethnic populations, and they have sort of deep influence within them. They are virtually autonomous enclaves within Myanmar, in which the Myanmar authorities have very little role, and the commercial domination of China is virtually total.
So is there not a pushback but setback for us in our strategic goals are, if not development, at least infrastructure products? Adanis have pulled out.
Right. I would say yes, definitely. You see, because I think in the period since we started our Look East and Act East, and particularly over the last 10 years of the old USDP government, as well as with the NLD government, we had our development projects had started getting a certain momentum. They were accumulating a certain public capital, if not already a political capital. And of course, all this was also linked to very much our Act Street strategy, our outreach to Southeast Asia and the ASEAN as a whole, and in particular, eventually to the Indo-Pacific. Yeah. So to that extent, that the first tier, the first ring, and the first passage that we have to cross by the landward route towards the Indo-Pacific has effectively been now. So, and then, and this casts a shadow on almost everything that we've been doing. In fact, it has affected trade. I'm sure it has affected the development projects. In conditions of instability like this, it's really impossible to proceed. Given the situation in Rakhine State and the Arakan Army, It's difficult to see the Kaladan project progressing, difficult to see the trilateral project progressing, which is primarily through Zagain and in Zagain, very close to the Chin areas. So effectively, all the political capital that we have invested at this moment remains bottled until it is reopened and released.
You talked about ASEAN's centrality and how India was also hoping that some kind of resolution could be reached because of ASEAN's involvement. We've seen some pushback from some members in terms of maybe Singapore, Indonesia. The Chinese were apparently pressurizing for Senior General Min to be present during an ASEAN conference, which didn't happen. But now, just today, in fact, again, the foreign minister of the military junta visiting Cambodia, meeting Hun Sen talking about when Cambodia chairs ASEAN, that they will allow the military junta to participate. So, in effect, is China getting a backdoor entry into how ASEAN is dealing with the whole?
Yeah, I think before we look at China, I think clearly there are divisions within ASEAN about this. You know that some countries have been more positively inclined towards this. And I think Prime Minister Hun Sen has been making that argument that we can't, if you want to resolve the crisis, you can't keep out the military altogether and trying to bring them back. And it is quite possible that China is assisting this process, even as at the same time it talks about all sides coming together to find a solution. So I think it's keeping its lines open to the NLD as well. Even in the ASEAN, there are contradictory and sometimes contrary pulls as well. Because even as, let's say, I think ASEAN actually took a strong position in keeping Senior General Min Aung Hlaing out of the ASEAN summit. But now we hear that the ASEAN is also dealing with elements of the NUG on certain kinds of issues. I think among the issues that have come up more recently has been sort of climate action. And climate action could be a channel through which it's possible for the international community to reach various groups, even particularly the insurgent groups that are controlling different parts of Myanmar. So yeah, there are contrary pulls. I don't think this is quite resolved. Where I think where we and some other like-minded countries can be a little more active, and I do believe that there have been some consultations along these lines, is that, ASEAN, I think, takes care of 2 or maybe 3, if you include Malaysia, of Myanmar's neighbors that are directly affected by the conflict.
Yeah.
But there are 3 others, China, India, and Bangladesh, theoretically at least, that are also neighbors and would also be affected by the spillover. So for long, I've maintained that, and there are other countries like Japan, which have substantial influence on both sides.
Yeah.
So that I think a more comprehensive kind of political approach would be still an ASEAN centrality approach, an ASEAN approach, but one that takes in particularly the immediate neighbors much more formally, perhaps, into its consultative process.
Ambassador Mukhopadhaya, thanks so much for your time and your experience and expertise. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure. Good to be with you, Amitabh.
And just a reminder to our viewers, if you already know about our channel, do spread the word so that we can get more subscribers on our YouTube channel. Do comment and give us your suggestions. If you're new to our channel, do check out our work both on our website and on YouTube. This is The Gist on StratNewsglobal. I'm Amitabh Revi.